wait one more minute because I see people are still logging in. Hi, I think we're just about ready to go. So I just want to take a minute to say hello and welcome everyone to the webinar. My name is Hannah Samaru from Data Conversion Laboratory, and I will be your moderator today. This morning, we're very excited to have Anne Rockley with us. Anne is the president of the Rockley Group and has an international reputation for developing XML-based strategies. She has been instrumental in establishing the field in e-content, content reuse, intelligent content strategies for multi-platform delivery, ebooks, and content management best practices. Anne is a frequent contributor to trade and industry publications and a keynote speaker at numerous conferences in North America, Europe, and Asia Pacific. Today, we'll be discussing how to put content front and center in your content strategy. Many times, the topic of content strategy will result in discussions towards the technology being used, but content strategy is not about technology, it is about the content. We are thrilled to have Anne and the Rockley Group here to share their experiences with us today. Now I will turn the presentation over to Anne Rockley from the Rockley Group. Anne, it's all yours.
Thank you, Hannah, and thank you all for coming. I wanted to start off by showing you some of the registration results. You were asked a number of questions when you registered, and it's always really fascinating to see what people say. If we take a look at the issues of what is the biggest business problem you face with your content, we can see that the largest component, 28%, is maintaining the quality. There's also issues of increasing writing load. There's issues of translation, publishing, and a number of other issues. So almost one-third of the people who responded felt that quality was the major issue. If we take a look at the other chart we have down here in the right-hand corner, have you already developed a content strategy? This one I find extremely encouraging. About 33%, so one-third of you have already put in place a content strategy. That's so exciting. If you'd asked that question about a year ago, most people would have said no, that they were just thinking about it. There's also a large number of you that are planning on getting started. It's just been implemented. And a few not yet, but you're working on it. So that gives you a bit of a background of the kind of people that are on the call. So as Hannah said, I'm going to talk about content strategy. It's not about technology. And the idea for this particular webinar sort of got sparked a number of weeks ago when I was on the reading some of the items on the content strategy listserv. And a lot of people were talking about mobile, and they were asking who's doing mobile, how are you doing it, what are some of the issues and the challenges that you're facing, et cetera, et cetera. And it was starting to become obvious that a lot of people were not yet doing mobile. And so the question started on, well, why aren't we doing mobile? And what happened at that point was it started to devolve into a question about the technology. And one person indicated that content writers, contributors don't use a lot of HTML codes. And if they could do that, it might make it a lot easier to deliver to mobile. And I just said, no, that's not what we should be asking our content contributors to do. It's really not about the code, and it's not about the technology. However, they are important, but it's about the content strategy. So what is the role of technology and the code? We're always going to have technology, and as time goes on, we need more and more technology, more sophisticated technology, in order to support our content strategy. And we as content strategists do need to understand the capabilities of technology. We need to understand what they can or cannot do. We need to understand what maybe some of the restrictions are. But we don't have to actually necessarily, small companies you may work much more closely with setting up the technology, and larger organizations probably less so. It shouldn't be sort of in our face. So we're always going to have technology because we're going to have a lot of different ways in which we need to deliver our content. And we can't deliver it unless we have good technology in place. And also, in behind the scenes, it's not just about delivery, it's a lot about content management, as many of you were saying in terms of managing the quality. So the way I like to think about technology is that technology is a tool. And as a tool, and I've got a little definition here for it, a tool is a means of accomplishing a task or a goal. It enables us to deliver our content strategy. So what is the primary goal of a content strategy? Well, there's a lot of different definitions for that available. And the way I like to think about it is that what we have to do when we develop our content strategy is to define a content experience for our customers that allows them being the customers, to achieve their goals. And it's not so simple as we used to have it, where, oh, well, it would go out on the web, or it would go out in print, or it would go out in a help file. We really have to think about that customer wherever they are, anywhere. They can be on a train. They can be in the office. They can be in a park sitting down, eating a picnic lunch, anywhere, at any time of the day or night, and on any device. We cannot craft our content for any particular device. We can only think about what we can do with each of those devices and make sure our content is adaptable to those devices. So I'm going to talk a little bit more about how we do that. So where does content strategy apply? I know there's been a lot of discussions about what is content strategy and who's doing content strategy. And I know there's been some quibbles. I'm doing content strategy and you're doing content strategy. Well, as far as I'm concerned, anywhere in the organization that you're creating content, particularly for customer-facing information, you must have a content strategy. So some of the major areas that we see and that we work with, of course, is marketing. A lot of what you see on a website today is marketing information. But there's also a tremendous amount of information associated with product usage. So often the technical documentation group. We also have our training groups. And we have support so that when people are coming and asking questions, so that can be customer support, can be customer services. You may have different names for it depending upon what kind of product or service that you are providing. And it can go out in multiple ways. So it can still go out in print. I remember a while back that, the whole idea was that print was going to go away. And certainly print is less and less important, but there are times when print is crucial. Say in a safety environment where you have to have print in case your computer or other device happens to go down, you need to have print in an emergency situation. People also like brochures, and you hand out things in sales stores and a variety of different things. So print is still important. We still have it, and we still have a lot of it. Of course, web is our primary vehicle, and I think it will continue to stay pretty primary. But we're starting to see a lot of people using smartphones. Now, they can be using web content that is designed for their smartphone. But if we have to think about it in a different way, they don't have the same screen real estate that we have on these, really big screens today that most people have on their with their desktop or with their laptop. So smartphones. We're seeing a huge increase in people reading information on e-readers. And it's not just fiction books and it's not just trade press books, but a lot of companies are starting to produce e-books instead of white papers or reports out to their customers and things like that, and they want them to go out on an e-reader, something like the Kindle. Or also, of course, we have a huge growing interest in tablets, whether they be Apple iPad or Android. No matter what we do, there's more and more and more ways to deliver our content. And what we have today is probably going to be quite different 6 months from now and a year from now, et cetera, et cetera. It grows tremendously. So we're going to see a lot of growth in the deliverables that we're pushing our content out to. So what do we have to do? If we don't want to think, it's all about the technology, how do I code it for a mobile screen, and how do I make sure that I've got just enough information displaying and my sidebars and things like that are not getting all munched and unreadable and so tiny you can't click on them. That's somebody's job, definitely, absolutely. But as a content strategist, what we have to start doing is don't think about the web, don't think about a printed page, don't think about the mobile screen. Think about content. It's all about the content. And you need to start thinking about that content in a semantic, structured way. The word semantic simply means meaning. So if you're using, typically say you're using a Microsoft Word file, you would have a heading, and then you would have maybe a paragraph, and it would be normal. And you might have a bulleted list, and it would be normal. And you would have potentially an image in there, and it's just in there. It's not tagged with anything. So you've got all this content, and there's no meaning. It's not named. We don't know what kind of content that is. But if we start moving towards structured content, so we can think about, hey, that first paragraph is an introduction, and we want that introduction to display in a certain way on a mobile phone or in context when it's on a web page. We think about what type of content that is, and when we name it and we structure it, it means that when that content goes out and is interpreted by a variety of different devices, then it knows, based on the rules that you have set up, how to interpret it. Oh, I'm not going to show the image. I'm going to let that be optional. Oh, the introduction goes here. Oh, I'm going to provide a link for this as opposed to including that content in the body. So we start to think about it in a very different way. I've got a couple of examples here. Often we think about sidebars. We have a lot of different information on a web page, but when we get down to that tiny mobile phone, it's really hard. We can't have that across. Your screen is just not wide enough. Even if you turn it into landscape mode, it's still not wide enough. Certainly you can pinch and expand, so see the whole thing and just grow it. But when you're working with a mobile specific app for the phone that allows you to read what you're looking at, you think about, where do I want to put that? How do I want to give people access to that? How do I want to make it possible for them to navigate when they can't see as much on their screen as someone on a traditional web page can? And in thinking about things like e-readers, we have things like, let's say, take a Kindle. Well, the Kindle, and in particular EPUB, at this point in time, it doesn't support tables terribly well. And a lot of us may have tables in our content. So what can you do if you're not looking at it on a large screen? If you're looking at it on a Kindle, you're looking at it on a smartphone, something like that. Well, what can you do? Well, the software's smart. And it says, hey, if I can't effectively display a table, it degrades, which means it provides an alternate solution for that, and it provides an image of the table. And then you can go in, you can zoom, you can expand that particular image so that you can actually read the table, as opposed to having real problems where the columns are breaking strangely and wrapping oddly and all sorts of things because you scaled down the size of what you're looking at. Same sort of thing. If it doesn't support video, well, it can degrade to an image of the video or a link outside. So those are all sorts of things that we have to think about as content strategists, but we don't need to actually do that. We just need to think of what are the alternatives in different situations that we need to take into account as we're designing our content. So when I'm talking about semantic structured content, it is content in which we can recognize the pieces of information that's in that content. And so what is structured content? Well, we really have structure everywhere, and people don't always notice it. But say working in traditional content, you may have been working with templates and style tags. Well, style tags are not really structure, but they're kind of structure. Style tags, might just say, oh, this is heading 1 or this is heading 3. Oh, but you might also have had a style tag that said this is a list or this is a note or something of that nature. But when we work with structured content, we write based on structural tags. And those structural tags may be represented as kind of like a fill-in-the-blank grid. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you some examples of structure based on recipes. I always use recipes when I'm talking about structure because it's really easy for all of us to recognize the structure in recipes. So I have 3 of them here. So for the first one, I've got an anise almond biscotti. And I've just sort of taken a screen grab of what it might look like in a Microsoft Word document. And then I have a version of it if I was to create a model, and that's something that we do all the time. We say, what is the structure of our content? What is the model for that content? And how do we want to represent it as we're going forward? Let's say you're somebody putting together a website in which you are going to share recipes along with other information. So, well, it went ahead all by itself there. I didn't even touch it. So just looking at the model, you can see in the first column, we call this a semantic structure. It's a recipe. It consists of a title. It has a list of ingredients, which have measures, which have quantity, units, and the item, the actual ingredient itself, say butter. And we've got instructions. We've got steps within those instructions. We have information about what country this is from, what type of recipe it is, what the yield is, and what the calories are. So we've got a semantic structure. So we're just starting to look at it and say, what is my structure? Not necessarily what we want our structure to be, but what is our structure at the moment. So let's take a look at another example here. This is an example of a recipe, which actually has 2 sets of measurements in it. It's actually a Canadian recipe. Canadians moved to the metric measurement system about 20 years ago. However, there's a significant portion of the population who did not learn metric and don't want to learn metric and want to maintain the standard measurements that they grew up with, cups and things like that. So it's got 2 sets of measurements in it. But otherwise, it's fairly similar to what we had before. So if we take a look at this one, and you can see where the gray shading is, that's highlighting some of the new information. Well, in this one, what do we have new? We have a description after the title. The previous one didn't. When we look at the ingredients, it's broken down into the imperial and metric measure. We have more information under nutrition. So in the previous one, we had calories, but in this one, we've got protein and we've got fat. And so do we want all of this information to be included? So that's a question we need to ask. Here's a third recipe for pecan pumpkin cheesecake. And as we look at this particular recipe, we see that it's quite a bit different. We've got crust, we've got filling, we've got topping. And when we really look at this, we're actually looking at a series of recipes. I could use that crust recipe in multiple recipes. It doesn't have to just be for this one. You might reuse the filling, not sure, but you would probably reuse the topping as well. So what we've done with this one is we said, okay, we have a repeatable component called a recipe, which we can have more of, that follows after the description. So these are starting to be our models that we're creating for our recipes and our semantic structure. And we would need to go forward in that and say, okay, I have 20 or 30 chefs contributing recipes from around the world. Do we always want a description? All right, going to go back here. It's funny, this one is moving forward all by itself. I'm not touching it. So do we want a description? Is that mandatory or is that optional? What about nutritional information? Mandatory or optional? A lot of people will answer mandatory for both of those. And we can do really cool things with our technology and have that information calculated. It does not have to be entered by our chef. And going along with our structured authoring, we then need to think about, well, how are we going to write this? Because we want to make sure that everybody, all our content contributors are writing their content in the same way. So if you're asking somebody to write a really short introduction or a really short teaser to some information, you want it written in a common way. And a lot of times our style guide is separate from our actual form or template that we're filling out. And believe me, this isn't what it's going to look like when our content contributors get to it. This is just part of what a content strategist needs to do in thinking about what are they going to do with their content. So we then have writing guidelines associated with it. So say for the title, it's mandatory, and you capitalize each word in the title. Something like a step must always contain the condition under which the step is performed. So you might start it off by saying, in a medium-sized bowl, you mix together the first 3 ingredients. That way people are getting the information as clearly as possible. So we put together our guidelines. How do we want people to create this content? And we think about how it's chunked. So here's an example of the content. And I just took a screen grab of Food Network. So this is a recipe for home roasted chicken. And you can see we have a lot of information on both the left and the right-hand side of the screen. We've got a picture. We've got a little introduction. We have the ingredients. And you can just see the little bit there of the directions. It was larger than the screen. If we take a look at that same information, they had to think about it differently for the iPhone. So again, we've got our picture. That's on the first screen that they see. Where did it come from? There's your little introduction for it. Now you see on the second screen, when people move through, it gives them the ingredients and the directions. Well, we could not chunk out automatically those ingredients and directions unless we had specifically tagged our content in that way. We have to know, is this an ingredient or is it a direction, an instruction, a set of steps? Which kind of information is it? So by tagging our content, we can do a variety of different things with it depending upon where it's delivered. You don't have to design for in the sense of the physical design, but you need to think about, how am I going to chunk my information? How am I going to structure it? How am I going to organize it? What pieces can be pulled out for reuse? How are we going to give our customer the most effective experience on whatever device they're looking at it? And so how do we prepare our content in the first place? All about content strategy. So I've got a couple, I've got another example here. So everybody says, oh yeah, well, recipes. I don't do recipes. Maybe you do, maybe you don't. But pretty much every company does marketing. And one of the things that we found when we're starting to work with different marketing groups was the value proposition. They're always writing the value proposition. Why somebody should buy this? What value are they going to get out of this purchase? And we took a look at the substructure of a value proposition, and it consisted of the value. That was sort of the, you'll get this by buying that. And then what are the competitive differentiators? Sometimes the competitive differentiators was optional. You didn't have to have it all of the time. But it was often, well, our competitors only offer blah, 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 or compared to the competition, we're 2 times faster, whatever the case may be. But it broke down. We had a structure. We had a semantic structure. And we could use it in many, many different ways. So here's an example of where we reuse that value proposition. And this was just starting to look at it in a variety of different vehicles. And yes, content strategy is beyond the electronic. As I said, it might be for print. So it might be in a brochure. We've got a value proposition. You might be giving it to a salesperson and say, okay, here's your elevator speech. This is what you need to say for very short who you are. You meet somebody, you're sitting next to them on the plane, and who are they and who are you and what do you do for a living? Also in the sales training, it could be part of web-based training. It could be part of a script. It could be part of all sorts of different things. But you would have it in many, many, many different places. It would always have the same structure. there may be reasons for differentiating that structure. Sorry, not the structure, the content. Structure stays the same, but the content may vary in different ways. But again, that's some of the decision making that you decide, how do we write this content for the optimum way that we're communicating this information. So I have a poll here, and I'd like to ask you whether you're currently creating structured content, and it's just a yes or no. And Hannah, if you could show the poll, that would be great. Hannah, are you there? Oh, there we go. Okay, so you should see that the poll is open, and your little navigation bar on the right shows you the actual poll. Oh, that's cool. So apologies, I'm not seeing the actual response. So Hannah, if you wouldn't mind.
Sure. Hi. So right now, looks like more than half is in the lead with 31%, but we're still getting some votes.
Okay, so let's give it another few, 30 seconds, and then Hannah, if you wouldn't mind closing it, I'd appreciate it.
No problem. All right, looks like we got a good amount of votes, so I'm going to go ahead and put you back to the presentation.
Okay. So, Hannah, can you display what we found in that particular poll?
Sure. And are you able to see it?
I do not. I'm sorry, one of those technical difficulties here. Maybe someone from the audience, can you tell us if you're seeing it? Okay.
Oh, yeah. It looks like they can see it.
Yeah, no, I can't. As a presenter, have to work on that one. Okay. Well, Hannah, could you just sort of describe what you're seeing there?
Yeah, absolutely. 14% of voters said none, so it would not fit into a data model. 24% said less than half. 30% was the winner with more than half. 16% said all of it, and no idea was also 16%.
Okay. Well, it's good. I mean, again, we are starting to see people use structure, so that's terrific. Okay, so if you would close the poll,
Sure.
And I will now move through and some additional portions of the screen. Okay, so I'm going to talk now about what is that content strategy and how do you put it together. I create and have coined the term what we call a unified content strategy. And we call it a unified content strategy for two reasons. One is that we feel very strongly that an organization can't have a content strategy in one area and a content strategy in another area without at least talking to each other. Because you've got one customer, and they're going to see your content throughout the content life cycle. So it's unified across the organization. But also, as I said earlier, it's a content strategy that enables our customers to achieve their goals anywhere, anytime, and on any device. So we're not siloing where content is created. So it's not just for the web, and it's not just for support, and it's not just for user documentation. It is, hey, let's think about it, and let's figure out how we are going to develop a content strategy that meets all the needs. So we need to design our content to be readable, obviously. We need it to be understandable. It has to be usable. There's nothing worse than having a content experience where it's so frustrating trying to read that content because it's not optimized for the device. And so it's got to be usable, and it's got to be usable wherever. But we also need to think about how do we manage that content? Because it's not enough to just deliver it. We need to figure out where is it, how do I find it, how can I retrieve it, who signed off on it, do I have the latest copy of it, etc. So we need to manage that content from creation through delivery and maintenance. It doesn't die when we deliver. We still own it, and we still have to make sure we take care of it. So the very, very, very first thing that you have to do, and it's absolutely critical, and you can't do anything else unless you know your customer. And there are many, many more questions that you can ask other than these, but these are some of the key ones. So what kind of content do they want? You know, are they looking for visuals? Are they looking for video? Are they looking for really good blog entries? Are they looking for really solid reference information? Are they looking for task-based information? What do they want? And to what depth do they want it? We so often either see content that is so detailed that people just go, oh, this is way too much. There's got to be a faster way for me to find the information that I need without having to wade through this. Or conversely, it just may be too short and there's just not enough information for them. They cannot make the right decision, complete a task, whatever the case may be, is you need to be able to figure out what depth. And you can layer that depth. So you can provide other links to other layers of depth. But you got to think about it, and you can't do that unless it's structured and modular. And then, of course, in what form do they want it in? So try to get an understanding of your audience. Are they always working, say, in the office when they read your content? We had a situation in the last couple of years where we were working with a medical device, and we were working in a surgical theater, and they needed information, but you had to sterilize it. And so we didn't want paper. That didn't make any sense whatsoever. They did have the technology for actually doing the surgery that they were using, but it really couldn't be used, say, if the surgical nurse needed to ask some information, that sort of thing. It really couldn't be used for that because it was focused on the actual surgery. So we looked at how could we provide a device, and in this case it was a tablet, that could be encased in something which could be sterilized before it was brought in. So just different things. So, you know, how are they doing it? In another case, we were told that people just didn't have access to the web. So what do you give them in situations like that? And finding out the way they work. So work or play or whatever it happens to be that your particular product or service is focused on. What are they trying to do at any point in time, and why would they want your content? So once we have an understanding of our audience, we always start with a content audit. And typically what I'm talking about here in a content audit is not a content inventory. Yes, that's important, extremely important. What have you got? How current is it? How valuable it is? But for the purposes of this webinar and for most of the work that we do, it's like, okay, somebody does a content inventory, typically not us, and we take a look at the actual content. So we want to figure out what do you have in the way of content, and how is it used? How is it reused? Is there any discernible structure in it already that we can build off of? Is that structure consistent, or are we going to have to create that? And as we're looking at the content, we're starting to look for opportunities for reuse, for enhanced usability, readability. We're looking at it to determine, well, how could people get at this information more effectively? So we look at it for better access and retrieval. We look at it for how well it's going to adapt to new delivery vehicles. The kinds of companies, some of the kinds of companies we've been working a lot with over the last year are what we would call a traditional publisher. So somebody who does a trade press book or a textbook or something of that nature. And they've got beautifully laid out print-based materials with sidebars and bleeding images and all sorts of stuff like that. And it's, well, they want to have it out on Amazon, and they want to put it out on the Kindle, which is in black and white, and or shades of gray, really. And how do you do this? What's going to work and what's not going to work? And we're always saying to people, you know, you're not compromising the quality of your content. Everybody's like, oh, my beautiful layout, what am I going to do with it? It's just a different delivery vehicle, and people love it, and they will happily work with that particular delivery vehicle because it's more convenient, it's portable, whatever the case may be. So what do I have to help them to identify in their content such that it can be structured and modularized so that we can represent that content in its best possible light on whatever device we're delivering to? So we do all of that in a content audit. So that's our analysis, and yes, it's part of the content strategy. And these are some of the things that we create as part of our content strategy. And I'm going to talk about each of them. So content models, reuse, workflow, taxonomy, and governance. So I've been talking a lot about content models at the beginning. And we create content models for everything because we simply do not move forward with our content strategy unless that content is structured. And whether it's structured with an existing standard, something like DITA, or maybe they choose to go with custom, doesn't really matter. The fact is that we're going to chunk it up, we're going to modularize it, and we're going to structure it the way we want it to be. Not the way it is now, but the to be. And as we're modeling that content, excuse me, I just need to cough here. Sorry about that. When we're looking at the content and developing the models, we're figuring out how can we have this content adapt to different devices. So on the web, mobile, tablet, different deliverables, print, web. I know I kind of have it in both places, but we think about it as a deliverable. Whether it's an EPUB for an ebook, is it interactive? Is it an app? We're starting to see companies develop a lot of ebook apps and apps that really have a lot to do with content. And how we're going to create responsive content so that it's not just whatever device I have today, but if Apple 6 months from now or Google or somebody else comes out with a totally game-changing device, I don't have to reinvent everything. We don't have to re-engineer everything. All we have to do is say, okay, what's different about this, and how do we map our content to that device? And then somebody, yes, somebody who works with the technology and works with the code figures out how to do that mapping for us. But we figure out what we want to do as a content strategist. We also look at the reuse strategy. How are we going to reuse it? What kinds of reuse are we going to have? And I'm not going to go into all the details. There are many different types of reuse. But level of granularity. How small are we going to chunk that content down to? Earlier I talked about a value proposition. Is my chunk the whole value proposition? Or is it maybe just a piece within that chunk, the value? Or have I got an introduction? Where would I use that? How would I use that? So how small are we chunking it down? And one thing I want to point out is even though we chunk our information, it doesn't mean that our content contributors are writing all these little tiny chunks of information without any context. They write much larger pieces of information in a structured environment, and then the smaller pieces can be extracted by the technology to show, hide, and deliver in a certain way. So I know a lot of people get really worried about, well, I don't want to be writing, a tiny sentence and it doesn't mean anything without context. You're always writing in context. But you have to think about multiple contexts. We also determine whether it's going to be purpose-built. So are you going to make the decision? I want this particular set of information for this audience and that set of information for another audience. Or is it going to be dynamic, in which they make some of the decisions and it goes and it grabs the chunks and puts it together for them dynamically as they request it? And we also really need to think about reuse governance. And I'm going to talk about governance again at the end. But I've gone into companies. They've done a terrific job of creating their reusable content. And they've asked us to come in because over time that content has become just as much as a mess as it was before they moved into a content management system. And it was because they forgot governance. Who's allowed to change the content? Who's allowed to create a derivative, another version of that content? What content are you allowed to reuse and not reuse? I mean, somebody might create a specific derivative piece for a very specific situation, but you don't want everybody reusing that piece. You want them reusing the standard piece, the core piece. All those sorts of things have to be thought about when you're developing your reuse strategy. We also think a lot about workflow. And I know you're saying, what has this got to do with content? A lot. What is your content lifecycle? How are you going to manage that content from creation through review and approval and then delivery? When does it automatically get delivered? Or does somebody press a button and it goes out the door? How do you know which version of a piece of information you should be using? I know companies that are working with 3 and 4 parallel versions of the same piece of content at any point in time, and it has to go through workflow. We need to know who's doing what, when they're doing it, and in what situation, so that our content never gets lost, never gets corrupted, never gets changed when it shouldn't have been changed. We have to be in absolute control of that content, and that involves workflow. And we have taxonomies, and that's the way we tag our content for storage and retrieval and dynamic assembly. If I've got a lot of information and yes, you are creating smaller chunks. I said you didn't create like sentence level ones typically, but even if you're doing sort of topic-based or subject-based type pieces of information, you have a lot more than you used to, and you got to be able to find them. We started talking with a company who has 50 years of history of content that they want to make available. It's still really, really valuable content to their customers. Can anybody find that? Know what any specific piece of information is? You've got to tag it. So we got to figure out what are the categories, like how are we generally going to group our information together? What's the terms or the metadata we're going to use? What is the relationships between the information? What are our best practices for tagging information? How do we make it really, really easy for our content contributors to add metadata to their content? Because it's something that most of them don't like to do, don't know how to do, and often gets skipped. And then you've got this content that is not stored properly and therefore could not be retrieved properly. As I mentioned before, the governance. What are the rules around your content? Who gets to do what with what content? Who's allowed to change it? How do you get content accepted as reusable? How do you determine that this content should go out the door, that it's approved, that it's valid, that it's the time that it should go out? What is all of that? And that can feed into workflow, and it also feeds into company education and a variety of different activities in terms of how you look after, how you govern your content. Okay, so I talked about all of this, and I said it's not about the technology, but I'll let you talk about the tools now. When you've done your analysis, when you've developed your content strategy, or at least you have a good sense of what your content strategy is, because there's nothing worse than picking a piece of technology that isn't going to meet your needs into the future. You really have to have a good handle on your content and what you're going to do with it. So you need to have done your analysis, developed at least a portion of your content strategy, developed your plan for managing and retrieving your content. You know what you need in terms of complexity of workflow. You know what you need in terms of metadata. You've identified, where are we sending this out to? Is it going out to smartphones? Is it going out to the iPhone? Is it going out to the Android? Is it going out to the tablets. Which tablets? Is it going out as an EPUB? Is it going out as Mobi Pocket, which is the Kindle? What is it doing? Where is it going? Because again, all of those sorts of things help you to evaluate the tools based on your requirements. You have to know that you can do everything that you need to do with your content. Otherwise, your content strategy is only a strategy and will not come to fruition. You've got to know that. And of course, don't forget your customers. The only thing I want to say here, and you see I have a big but, is that technology is not the focus for the content contributors and never should be. We get a whole lot of people. Some are professional writers. Some are professional instructional designers. Others are business analysts, marketing, communications. They can be medical writers. They can be doctors and physicians. They can be anybody. They should not have to think about the technology. It should not be in their face. It should not impede their tasks. It should support their tasks. So tools must always enable your content strategy. So just another quick poll here, and Hannah, if you'll help out again. Where do you deliver your content?
Okay.
I can see I probably should have had an other there, but let's see where it comes out. Okay, how are we doing, Hannah?
It looks good. It looks like people are wondering. People have some questions, but we can address it after.
Yeah, we can address the questions after.
We have 73% of people voted, so maybe we can wait a couple more seconds, and then I'll end the poll. We can look at the results. Yeah, some people have, they deliver it in multiple ways, but they're going to pick the best one.
Yes, it should have been multiple choice.
Yeah. Or all of the above. But it's
or all of the above, yes.
Yeah. So we know that there will be multiple choices, but just try to pick, I guess, the best one for now, or?
Yeah, I think so at this point.
Yeah. All right. I think I'm going to close it out now and look at the results.
Thank you.
Okay. Anne, are you able to see it, or should I
am not. If you could give people a sense.
Sure, absolutely. And I just want to say that these are the results, but many people commented saying that it would be multiple avenues. But for this specific poll, 54% of voters said web, 44% said print, 0% said mobile and tablet, and 2% uses the e-reader.
Now that's fascinating. That's fascinating.
Yeah.
So I think it does lend itself to the discussion that sort of launched this whole webinar in how many people are doing mobile. That's good.
Yeah, that's very interesting. So
okay.
Actually, and there was, sorry, I think there was a bit of a problem earlier with the other poll. Is it okay if I just run it now? Because I think we ran the wrong one.
Oh.
I know.
Okay, maybe what we could do, I just see we're about 10 minutes from the top of the hour, and I'd like to leave time for questions.
Okay, so we can just go back later if we have time.
Yeah, if we could maybe just close the poll now.
Yeah.
And I'll just sort of finish up here. We'll get some questions, and we'll see how we're doing for time then.
Okay, sounds perfect.
Okay, so as a summary, content strategy is about the content, not about the technology. It's about defining a content experience for our customers that enables them to achieve their goals anywhere, anytime, and on any device. And when we create our content strategy, it involves creating responsive content models, which are structured content, a reuse strategy, workflow, taxonomy, and governance. And it's only when we understand our requirements and have defined the content strategy that it's time to pick the tools. So I just want to leave you with a little bit of information here. Sorry, I know the screen is awfully busy. Apologize, we're trying to get a lot on one screen. One thing I wanted to let you all know, many of you may already have a copy of our seminal book, as it's called, the Managing Enterprise Content and Unified Content Strategy. However, we are in the process of revising it, and there will be a new there will be a new edition of it in spring. We're aiming for end of February, early March, and it will be heavily focused on content strategy. We also have a new book that's almost ready to come out the door called eBooks 101. And we have an existing book which is available, Amazon, Lulu, etc. And it's called Data 101, and that's in the second edition of that one. And I'm sure in the next year, as data continues to change and we learn more, we'll be updating that one again. So you see our contact information. And then I also wanted to let you know about the Intelligent Content Conference that will be held in February, 22nd to 24th in Palm Springs, California. And this is the 4th year that we're running this conference. And it's really focused on helping organizations to develop intelligent content, which in our mind is content which is structured, is tagged, is adaptable, can do all of the sorts of things that we're talking about here. And we're just going through the speaker proposals now, and we'll be posting the program for that very shortly. So I'm going to open it up for questions now, and please feel free to submit a question to the chat, and then Hannah's going to select a few for me.
Great. So we have one from Catherine, who was hoping that you could define purpose-built or dynamic in a bit of depth.
Certainly. Purpose-built is typically where you, the organization, the content strategist, decides we have a lot of different types of content, and we want to consciously take some of those pieces of content and build it with a specific purpose in mind for a particular audience. So it's more like customized content where you're making the decisions and not the customer. The customer's not making the decisions about it, what they need. Whereas dynamic is more a case of somebody maybe coming to your website and they log in and you know what type of role they have in their organization or who they are. Maybe they bought something from you in the past. And then they're saying they want a particular type of information. Then they can select from a series of options. The system can go away and at that time, so on the fly, dynamically build a set of content for them and deliver it to them. And so they would have something that very specifically meets their needs at that point, and maybe they save that information, like their profile, and they can come back to it, and each and every time they log in, they don't see everything anymore. It sets it up to show them what they're interested in. It's dynamic. It happens as they request it.
Great. Dorian wants to know, what are some methods that are currently used to govern reusable content?
Well, there's a variety of different types of methods, and we have to get a little bit into technology here. There's ways of managing our reusable content. So first, as a content strategist, I'm thinking about things like I want topic-based reuse, so it's a fairly decent-sized chunk. I want to have filtered reuse where I've got different sets of content in my information, and I want to show it maybe when I've got one audience or it's in one region, and hide it when it's in another one or when it's on a particular device. That's typically called filtered or conditional reuse. We might have variable reuse in it, so we've got short, maybe the name of your product varies from region to region, maybe your contact phone numbers change, those sorts of things. So we as content strategists make definitions of how we want to structure that reusable content in the beginning, and help to educate our content contributors in terms of creating that, or we may have people on staff that help them once they've created the content to then do this with it. And then we need the technology. And different technologies handle it different ways. So, for example, DITA, when it's tagged in a certain way, then when it's published, DITA, for those of you who may not be familiar with it, stands for Darwin Information Typing Architecture. And it's a type of XML standard that's used heavily in the technical documentation industry. It's starting to be used heavily in training materials. We're seeing great inroads into medical devices, pharmaceuticals. We're even seeing inroads into marketing materials using DITA. But at any rate, so if I'm using that and I've got a content management system, it can then track where content is used and reused. It can track who changed it. It can track whether a derivative version was made of it, who made it, when did they make it. We can see all sorts of things with that technology, and there are other custom XML systems that will do the same, websites. Typical web content management tools don't manage reuse as effectively as what we call component content management systems, but they're getting a lot better over time. So that's typically how we manage reuse.
Great. What kind of educational background does one need to get into content strategy? It seems to be a question.
Well, content strategy is really, really new. In that sense, I am not aware of any college or university programs that are offering content strategy at the moment. There are many workshops you can take. So if you can take one of those, go to a conference, those all really help. But at minimum, because content strategy has a lot to do with content, you should look towards getting education in an area that hones your knowledge of content, being in the writing side, the editing side. I have a degree in information science. That has helped me to manage content more effectively. We're finding content strategists coming from a number of different areas. So if you have a really solid either track record or educational experience in something to do with content, journalism, tech writing, instructional design, all sorts of different areas, marketing writing, that's a really good basis for it. And then read everything you can find. And there's a couple of good books on it. There are great workshops on it. There's conferences. Christina Halverson's Confab conference. There's the UK also has conferences on content strategy. So while you may not have a designation after your name, you're learning as much as you can every day.
Okay, it looks like we have time for a couple more questions. There's a lot coming in. So whatever we don't have time for today, we will definitely post the answers online. But for now, and can you go into just some metrics that the audience can use to measure the effectiveness of content strategy?
That's a hard one.
I know.
I think that's a webinar unto itself. There's a variety of different ways that you can measure customer satisfaction, and which obviously is content strategy. A very simple way is if you can do a survey of your audience. Maybe you're about to redo your website, so if you survey people in advance and you got some feedback, also take a look at the kinds of calls and issues that are coming into the customer support area for all the different ways that they get the content, and checking all your social media, sending out tweets and things like that. Just trying to get as much information before you make a change. And then when you make your change, do the exact same thing to measure as you did prior to. So if you did a customer survey, do another customer survey. But don't do it immediately after you release it. Certainly you can get some kind of feel-good feedback from people. They liked it, they didn't like it. But give it a little bit of time because people have to actually use it before they can comment on it. So give them a little bit of time to use it. Then ask them again and see if your satisfaction ratings increase. Put together focus groups, and then you can go back to the same focus group and ask them how they evaluated it before and how they're evaluating it afterwards. You can check search results. You can check your web analytics, variety of different things like that.
Okay. Do you think we have time for one more question, Anne, or?
I think one more.
Okay, great. Could you suggest methodology for analyzing content life cycles and like sources involved in that?
Oh, yes. We actually do have a methodology in that Managing Enterprise Content book right now. Unfortunately, it's out of print, but you can buy a secondhand copy of it. But essentially what we do is we talk to everybody that's involved in the content lifecycle. So we talk to content contributors, and we ask them questions like, you know, what do they do? How do they do it? What are some of the challenges they have in doing it? What do they like? What don't they like? Do they have suggestions for change? So we talk to content contributors, reviewers, approvers. If you've got people like legal and quality and regulatory, we talk to them and ask how they interact and what works for them and what's not working for them. And we talk to global people doing localization and translation. We talk to the people who do the publishing. So that's all your internal piece. And of course, you've got that front end getting out to the customers. And I would really, really recommend, if you can, trying to do some focus groups. If you've got user conferences or any time where your particular audience is gathered, go and talk to them there, because you can figure out what's not working inside, and that will help you to do the content management side of your content strategy. But you really, really need to understand your customers, and so getting out to them in whatever way you can. Twitter works well, prizes if they respond, et cetera, et cetera. Those are really good things that people respond well to.
Great. It looks like we're all out of time for today, but I do have some remaining questions, and I will get those over to you, and then we'll post them online.
Okay, thanks, everyone.
Thank you for attending today. Have a beautiful day.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.